Previously on the Fan of History, Ashurnasirpal II is the king of the universe, or at least he says he is. The king of Assyria beat every foe and he threw the biggest party in history. In 884, Omri founded the Kingdom of Israel. Welcome to the Fan of History. I am the Fan of History, and we are going to talk about what happened in the 870s BC. This is going to be part 1, so there will be a part 2 video too. Please watch the videos The Great Civilizations of the World in 900 BC and previous decade reports, especially 879, the greatest party of all time, and the 880s BC for some background on Ashurnasirpal II. Everyone is in fear of the great king of Syria, and here we see him gutting a lion that had the audacity to attack him. Ashurnasirpal II will rule Assyria for this full decade, and he will go to war. He has a religious duty to go to war to honor Ashur, the god of war. And he has a clear goal. He wants to reclaim all the territory of the Middle Assyrian Empire and be the equal of the great kings of old, his fathers. They seem to be related. In this episode, you will learn what are on these walls. You will learn why Ashurnasirpal II has a whole section in the British Museum in London. You will also see if Ashurnasirpal earns my nickname, the Lord of Massacres. But first, a new power has arisen. And it's Aram Damascus. In the last episode we introduced Hamath and Karkemish. But this, Aram Damascus, is the most powerful of the Aramean kingdoms. His first known ruler is Ben-Hadad I, and here we're looking deep in the Old Testament. He might have ruled 885 BC to 865 BC. Aram Damascus will be the center of resistance to the early Assyrian Empire very shortly, but not quite yet. And we don't know if the kingdom of Judah existed. I just wanted to mention that because it is on this map. There is no archaeological evidence that has convinced me that the kingdom of Judah existed, but it might very well have. And it will soon become complicated to talk about Israel without mentioning Judah. Omri is the king of Israel, and he has moved the capital to Samaria in the last episode. There are massive building projects in Samaria, and we know this from archaeological records. Earlier, Ben-Hadad I had fought Israel, and Damascus controlled some very important trade routes, especially the trade routes to the Assyrian Empire. Remember, the Assyrians are very interested in trade. And there are trading streets or markets especially dedicated to Arameans and Damascus in Samaria, but this might just be good financial policy on Omri's part and not because of some treaty he's forced to live under. So in 878 BC, Ashurnasirpal attacks. And this time he's gonna try to emulate his father and grandfather. He goes down the Khabur River, this is the Khabur River, and goes to the middle Euphrates here. Tribute is forthcoming, everybody's paying, except the Suku. The Suku are assisted by Babylonian auxiliaries. There seems to be 50 riders and 300 or 50 chariots or 3,000 foot soldiers from Babylon who are fighting for the Suku. The Suku have a city called Zuru, and it's not to be mixed up with the city of Zuru of the Bit-Adini on the Khabur, and that city is currently under Assyrian rule. I know the names of these places. There are very few maps showing all these places. It's very confusing, and I might mix something up. But the leader of the Suku are besieged in Zuru. There is a battle for 2 days, and then I leave it to Ashurnasirpal to tell us what happened.
Their men, young and old, I took prisoners. Of some I cut off their feet and hands. Of others I cut off the ears, noses, and lips. Of the young men's ears I made a heap. Of the old men's heads I made a minaret. I exposed their heads as a trophy in front of their city. The male children and the female children I burned in flames. The city I destroyed, and consumed with fire.
Ouch! That must have hurt. Some enemies escaped to river islands in the Euphrates, and the Assyrians couldn't get to them. The obvious message here is that you shouldn't mess with Ashurnasirpal II. And Babylon just did! So what about Babylon? Well, Babylon is ruled by Naboo-Aplu-Iddina, the guy to the right with the cute hat in this picture. Babylon is undergoing a huge recovery, coming out of the Dark Age, and it seems to be very suicidal to mess with Assyria at this point. But nominally they are allies and friends. Remember those diplomatic marriages? There is a cultural revival going on, there is a literary revival going on. I'm going to talk more about that when I cover the 860s. But the king's brothers, Sabdanu, and those 3050 warriors, perhaps then, are taken prisoners by the Assyrians. We don't know what happened to them. Naboo-Aplu-Iddina also has something no Babylonian king has had in a long time. He has a warrior king inscription. He's honored as a warrior. And it's very unclear what he did. I read one modern book that says he beat up the Zuru, another Aramean tribe. He also recovered the city of Sippar, probably from the Zuru then, and re-established the temples there. This city had been ravaged by the Arameans hundreds of years ago. But he doesn't take any further action against Ashurnasirpal II. And Ashurnasirpal never attack Babylon. So this guy was either very weak and no threat. You remember the Assyrians liked the Babylonians for some reason. Or he was very, very clever and managed to stay out through diplomatic means. We don't really know. In 878 BC, King Ji of Zhou China dies. King Ji ruled China between 885 and 878 BC. And the central power has grown weaker over the Zhou dynasty. And this new king, the 10th king, is King Li, the son of King Ji. And King Li is, maybe he's not about to accept that the Zhou kingship is losing power over China. Or maybe he will accept that if you pay him. In 878 BC, Ithobal I becomes king of Tyre. Tyre is the Phoenician kingdom here. This is a modern map of Lebanon. But I want to show you where Tyre is. He is the father of Jezebel. Yes, that Jezebel. And he killed the last of 4 brothers who ruled Tyre. So there's a new dynasty started with Ithobal I. And this development has already started, but Tyre is becoming the most powerful of the Phoenician kingdoms, the Phoenician city-states. And slowly Tyre is gaining control over Phoenicia. So the king of Tyre is sort of becoming the king of Phoenicia as well. Israel is a tight ally to Tyre. And there's a lot of trade going on between Tyre and Israel. And we'll see there will be more exchanges. In Egypt, there is a mess. There are 2 dynasties that rule. The 22nd dynasty is ruling Lower Egypt. That is Egypt close to the Mediterranean. And Har-CSA is still the king of Upper Egypt in Thebes. We also have very poor documentation, because almost everything we have from this decade is stuff that Ashurnasirpal II tells us through his scribes. So in 877 BC, Ashurnasirpal attacks again. He is building in Kala, Nimrud, who is up here, which is up here. And Suhu, Lake, and Hindanu has rebelled. I think Lake was an Assyrian province. So some of the rebels are Assyrian troops and governors. This is pretty bad, and the Bit-Adini, this tribe over here, they have sworn to obey and pay tribute to Ashurnasirpal, but they have installed a king over this area that were controlled by the Assyrians. So Ashurnasirpal has to bring his mighty host down the Khabur River, and this time they have built rafts of goatskin, which make it possible for them to travel the river so they can get to those river islands. People can't hide from them. The kingdom of Suhu and Lake are destroyed. And the campaign is detailed by Ashurnasirpal II in great detail. It would cover like 3 episodes if I told you everything about this campaign, so I'm not gonna do that. But this is the first. These are Assyrian governors who have rebelled. So what does the Lord of Massacres do when such things happen? Well, let's hear it from the man himself.
I built a pillar over against his city gate, and I flayed all the chief men who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. Some I walled up within the pillar, some I impaled upon the pillar, and others I bound to stakes round the pillar. Many within the border of my own land I flayed, and I spread their skins upon the walls, and I cut off the limbs of the officers, of the royal officers who had rebelled.
Ouch, again! In 877 BC, the Western Rong invade China. The Western Rong comes from the land of Huyaxia that this very excellent map shows. The Zhou capital, Hao, was attacked, and this further weakens Zhou authority, and King Li is very frustrated because he has other things on his mind than fighting barbarians. So the nobles will have to take up the fight against the Western Rong. The Western Rong is a collective name. The Chinese are like, especially the Zhou Chinese, are like the Greeks. They only say barbarians, but they have some differentiations between barbarians. These Western Rong were the enemies of the Shang state that came before the Zhou state. There are 4 barbarians defined at this time, 4 different types of barbarians. The Eastern Dongyi, which seems to stop Zhou access to the sea in the south. The Northern Beldi, the Western Rong, and the Ji. The Western Rong actually are described as having green eyes and red hair, and they could possibly come from what is today Tibet. The Dog people that we talked about earlier in the 10th century BC, they were part of the Western Rong. In 876 BC, Ashurnasirpal decides to punish the Bit-Adini. They put that king on the Euphrates, and they will have to pay. And his attack target of choice is the city of Kabrapu. This is an important fortified city of the Bit-Adini, and it's the first of 4 major campaigns that Ashurnasirpal launches west into Syria. I haven't found the location of Kabrapu, and it might be Hadatu on this map actually. But, well, Ashurnasirpal, what happened to the city of Kabrapu?
In strife and conflict I besieged and conquered the city. I felled 3,000 of their fighting men with the sword. I captured many troops alive. I cut off some of their arms and hands. I cut off of others their noses, ears, and extremities. I gouged out the eyes of many troops. I made 1 pillar of the living and 1 pillar of heads. I hung their heads on trees around the city.
The Bit-Adini are still around, but they don't control the crossing of the Euphrates anymore. And they are now paying tribute, because they don't want this to happen to their other cities. But the Bit-Adini will be a problem at a later date for the Crown Prince, Shalmaneser. This is the end of the strong Aramean states east of the Euphrates, and there is no strong Aramean force that actually defies Ashurnasirpal east of the Euphrates. In 875, Ashurnasirpal pushes through the upper Euphrates. The city of Karkemish is ruled by King Sangara. Karkemish used to be so powerful during the time of the Hittite Empire, but it's still one of the most powerful cities in Syria. Remember that King Sangara was at Ashurnasirpal's great party. The Assyrians marched through the lands of the Bit-Adini, and they actually gained tribute and auxiliaries from their old enemies who are scared to death. The Assyrians crossed the Euphrates on rafts, and this is actually depicted in the reliefs, as you can see to the lower left. And once again, I will let Ashurnasirpal II tell you what happened when he reached the city of Karkemish.
The nobles and elders of the city came out to see me to save their lives. They seized my feet and said, "If it pleases you, kill. If it pleases you, spare. If it pleases you, do what you will."
Well, this seems pretty clever, because these guys actually live. They totally surrender, they give luxury gifts to Ashurnasirpal, and he has now secured the Euphrates. And his next target is the major push to the Mediterranean Sea. And we will talk about that next time in part 2 of the 870s BC. So, who will dare oppose Ashurnasirpal II? Everybody has opposed him, has lost, and he has been doing this for 10 years now. Will his city ever be finished? They are still working on the great city of Kala and the palaces and stuff I showed you in the last video. And also now, Ashurnasirpal has this hardened army who has seen all these atrocities, and he can't really let this army loose. He has to gather it every year because he's forcing everybody to pay heavy tribute, and these tributes are heavier than any Assyrian tribute before. So if he shows weakness, or if he doesn't raise this army, people will rebel against him. Next episode will be on July 7th, 2014. I do this report weekly. If you want to support me, please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. That's the main thing you can do. You can also talk to me on Facebook or on Twitter. And share these with all the people you know that like history, because that will help to keep me going. Thank you for watching.